So this, huh? What is this? This is just the picture? Oh, it's just the artwork. It's just a fantasy artwork. It's like I think that's an elf, and she's looking at some lost ruin with some, I don't know, magical sort of power. Yeah, the staff. It's holding a staff. Yep. So what I'm going to read you is a short story I wrote for one of my creative writing classes. And it deals with various issues. I'll ask what those issues are if you can pinpoint them. So yeah. The city skyline stood in stark silhouette against the backdrop of the setting sun, painting the horizon with a palette of pink and orange hues. Its feeble yet brilliant rays bathed the world below, casting an ethereal glow over the urban landscape. Amidst this celestial spectacle, two figures adorned in elaborate clashing costumes dominated the heavens. The titanic clash sent shockwaves through the atmosphere with bone-rattling blows, fracturing the air with their lightning-fast movements. The epic battle unfolded before the eyes of a young boy, a mere spectator to the awe-inspiring display of power. Flames of vibrant colors clashed with shards of wicked gleaming ice, creating a spectacle that transcended the boundaries of reality. With each passing moment, the boy's eyes remained fixated on the unfolding spectacle, eagerly anticipating the next exhilarating moment. However, as the battle escalated and his mind became consumed by the fervor of the combatants, the once vivid colors and distinct silhouettes that had filled the sky began to meld and blur together. The vibrancy of such a scene smeared, fading back to reality. His gaze was torn away from the mistakes on the pages that lay on his lap. He found himself back in the park, surrounded by flowers and an opulent fountain. A bronze statue stood at the forefront of his vision, shining in splendor. Setting aside the marker clutched in his cramping hand, he looked at the statue depicting a smiling elderly woman, invoking a mixture of sadness and pride within him. Malik, the boy heard from behind, his eyes tracing the figures of his two parents who wore loving smiles. It's time to head back soon. Okay, the boy absently said, his eyes never leaving the bronze creation that glittered in the dimming sunlight. And then there's like a little line break. Eclipse had always been a force of nature, even before the world knew her name. She was no Cape Crusader or spandex-clad warrior, but she possessed a power that surpassed any comic book hero. She was a grandmother, and her strength lay in unwavering determination to protect her family and her community. Born into a world of injustice, Eclipse had witnessed the slow decay of her neighborhood over the years. The once thriving community had fallen victim to corporate greed and government apathy. Pollution choked the air, lead poisoned the water, and the threat of massive flooding loomed over their heads like a storm cloud. But Eclipse refused to stand idly by and watch her loved ones suffer. For decades, she had been an environmental activist, a voice crying out for change. She rallied her neighbors, organized protests, and tirelessly advocated for their rights. Her message was simple but powerful. People mattered more than profit. She fought for clean air, safe water, and a future where her grandchild could grow up without the shadow of pollution hanging over them. But there was a formidable adversary standing in her way, the Snowfield Corporation. Led by a wealthy group of white men who cared only about their bottom line, the corporation had no qualms about sacrificing the health and well-being of the community for the sake of profit. They disregarded regulation, cut corners, and turned a blind eye to the suffering they caused. Eclipse's relentless pursuit of justice had made her a hero in the eyes of the community, but they saw her as an invincible force, someone who could challenge the powerful. To them, she was their leader, but the corporate giant saw her as a threat. They couldn't deal with the threat she posed to their control, so they launched a smear campaign, painting her as a troublemaker and a nuisance, and an uneducated, angry Black woman disrupting their plans, a mere grandmother on welfare. But they underestimated Eclipse's resolve and the strength of the community she had united. The turning point came when the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, finally stepped in. They exposed Snowfield's corporation's unethical practices, revealing the extent of their pollution and disregard for the law. The corporation was finally held accountable, and Mr. Snowfield, the ruthless leader, faced the possibility of conviction. Desperate and concerned, Mr. Snowfield resorted to the unthinkable. In a cruel and heartless act, he brutally sent assailants to attack Eclipse, hoping to silence her forever. But little did he know that he had already lost. Eclipse's legacy lived on, etched into the hearts of her community. With the EPA's intervention, only possible due to her efforts, the environment slowly began to heal. The air grew cleaner, the water safer to drink, and the threat of flooding diminished. Eclipse had won, even in her near death. In a public ceremony, the community honored their hero. They erected a statue in her likeness, a bronze tribute to the woman who had fought for the future, and stood proudly in the spot where the Snowfield Corporation's building once loomed, a symbol of resilience and justice rather than oppression and hate. And so as the sun set on this day, Eclipse's grandson Malik stood before her statue. He gazed up at the bronze figure, feeling a sense of pride and sorrow wash over him. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Grandma, you are the true hero." Thus, the legacy of Eclipse, the grandmother who defied the odds and fought for her community, lived on. She may not have worn a cape, but her courage and determination had made her a true superhero in the eyes of those who knew her story, and those who would soon know her as the main character in the breakout comic Eclipse, written by Malik J. Allister.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, that was my reading. Let's go. Thank you. So any questions? Yep.
In all fantasy, things that you see, the theme, to me, as an older person, is always has to be some scary, nightmarish figure that's beyond imagination, scarier. So when you, how about younger people reading something like that, that is beyond their experience?
Yeah. So what exactly are you asking?
Well, it's why is that so much? Then you have a great person that beats the scary again.
Yeah, so I don't know. I think that's just a trope of like fantasy then. A lot of fantasy that are coming out now are very different. I've read a bunch of stories that are like that. There's always like some dark entity and you don't even like really know what that is. It's just like some sort of power. But the thing is, or nowadays, a lot of the books that are coming out are actually like Game of Thrones, for example, used it's the War on Roses. That's an actual historical like thing. And so a lot of people have been actually using real life history and just adding fantastical elements to make their own. So it's been differing a lot. And there's been trends, with social media, there's like book talk. Does anyone know what book talk is? Oh, okay, you know what book talk is. But yeah, so there'll be like a book that has a trend and then everyone reads it and then that trend will go away and the new one will pop in. So a lot of old fantasy all like that, but a lot of new ones are coming out with different stuff.
My daughter, she's a reader too, like him. They both are just such readers, but she's reading the series now. And I was amazed because the characters are Indian. And it brings in Indian culture, mythology. She found this and started reading, and I really was just, my mind was blown because it was so different than a lot of traditional fantasy. You have women empowerment, you have real issues that are brought in, but culture, I mean, it's just beautiful and still the, fantasy elements. And so this is actually by Sayanti Dasgupta, but she has a series, and I'll send Joe maybe if people are interested. I found it amazing. She introduced me and now I'm hooked.
Yeah, fantasy like that has become a lot more inclusive. Like a lot of people from cultural backgrounds can even find books that relate directly to them, just with fantastical elements, so they can still feel a familiarity, but also escape and have a stress relief. So it's really crazy. I mean, if you just think about the sheer amount of writers and books out there, I mean, the numbers probably in the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. Any other questions?
People think the scary monster types and good, the hero or heroine.
Well, I would actually argue against that now because, like I said, with the villain, a lot of stories have like anti-heroes, they call it. So they're not good or bad per se. They just do it for their own gain or because of that. So like a lot of stories will have this. So like a person might have magic and stuff and kill a bunch of the enemy. but to their own side, they're the hero. But then you get to see the opposite point of view. And to them, he's the villain. But to his own people, he's the hero. He's the one liberating them, or he's the one who's saving them. So, like, there's both sides in this war, like Joe said, or how there's all sides in the world. I mean, it shows, well, good writers, at least in my opinion, show both sides and make the reader think about it. But that is how the normal fantasy trope is. Boy gets sword, slays dragon, he wins. That is the normal trope. But nowadays, it's been different just because I think people want to read stuff that are a little bit more thought provoking.
Are there any things that you would recommend if we want to learn more from actually reading? You have a recommended reading list.
Yeah, I can send a whole list out if you want. I've read so many fantasy books. I think last year on Kindle alone, I read like 450 books. So yeah. So I've become an avid reader. I really like the Game of Thrones series and stuff like that. What other series? I like Red Rising, if you've ever heard about Red Rising. Red Rising is a sci-fi series about a caste system. And so it kind of draws from Indian mythology or Indian heritage. So there's a caste system of Brahmanism. I don't know if anyone knows about that, but basically, so they're color coded. It would be like golds are on top and they rule all these worlds. And there's a red who somehow advances to gold, and it's a whole rising, Red Rising. So they come up with a whole civilization, and they fight this evil empire, and eventually they take back their freedom and stuff like that. So it has that fantastical element of sci-fi wars or the starships and stuff like that, but it also has the thought-provoking stuff in fantasy that I like. Yeah, injustice themes. Yep. Yeah, I just speed read. So like in between like classes and stuff, like when I study and I know I need a break, I just kind of open a book and just flip the pages. Yeah. Just scan through it. Helps me relax.
Sci-fi for other planets, like have you read the Ben Bova Mars series?
I have not, but I've heard about that.
Let's read that because it brings in American Indian their folklore into Mars.
Yeah.
And that was written a long time ago, but all this Mars stuff now, it's not, some of that stuff isn't that far-fetched.
No, yeah, that's another thing. So with sci-fi and stuff like that, like Octavia Butler, I actually bought 3 copies. A lot of stuff that they think that might happen has actually happened. So it's kind of crazy. I think innovation and creativity, which is basically fantasy, comes to fruition a lot. I think in the near future, we probably will be going to Mars and stuff like that. But like back in the 1940s or even now, I mean, like that's just fantasy to us. I mean, like you read a novel about that, but now it could truly happen, which is that fantasy still if it happens? So that's something to ponder on.
Bringing that up, I was thinking this morning about the drawings that Leonardo da Vinci made of what looks like what we recognize as a helicopter. And probably 500 years ago, people were laughing him out of the room.
Yeah.
That'll never happen. Bad chance of seeing one of those. And that's like, to me, is the history of science fiction. Is if you start imagining it, sooner or later, somebody may actually.
Yeah, it might actually happen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. And to end it off, I just want to say fantasy is for everyone. So all ages, all genders, all sexes, anything, any belief, any faith. Fantasy encompasses all life aspects and shines a unique light on them. And fantasy is the tangible creations of creativity. And I hope you all will bask in its powers with me. Thank you.
Your quote on the screen.
And the last thing, yes.
Is that the
Oh, no, that's not my quote.